tools, and sometimes these also have consequences, maybe not now, but in the future. So what we'll be looking at today is both at the possible risks associated with artificial intelligence, but in particular also artificial general intelligence. Is there something we need to be taking care of right now? Is this something that's up for the future? But we'll also look at things like what is the status of research going on in AI, and also if there are philosophical questions around this that need to be answered. And so I'm delighted to have three speakers and panelists who are going to be talking about this. We will begin with Simon Friedrich, who is Associate Professor at the University of Groningen, and he's been also involved in looking at what is called effective altruism. And in this connection, some people even think that the artificial intelligence, or AGI, could be even a greater risk than climate change, for example. So he'll be looking at, and he's published on this issue quite a lot, and we will show you some of the presentations later on as well. So then after that, we will have Matthias Niepert, who's professor at the Institute for Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning in Simulation Sciences at the University of Stuttgart. I know him for a long time also from our joint work at the NEC. He has got an excellent publication record in AI and machine learning. And finally, we'll be asking the question as to whether we need to also look at some of the philosophical issues, for which we will have Nikhil Mukherjee, who is at the Munich Center for Mathematical Philosophy. And he has looked at ethical issues, one of which has been the so-called trolley problem, which some of you may be aware of. And he'll also be answering the question as to why is philosophy involved in this kind of a question at all. So without further ado, I would hand over now to Simon Friedrich to take over and maybe introduce himself a bit more than I did, and then go on with his presentation. So Simon, it's up to you.
Yeah, many thanks, David and Amadeo, for the introductory words. Many thanks for having me here. It's very humbling for me. I feel honored to be able to talk to you about these things. I am mainly a philosopher of physics. Actually, in recent years, also have done some philosophy of technology, and looked into some aspects of what might be key questions relating to the future of humanity in relation to AI going forward. But I mean, I don't have nowhere near the competence of, for instance, Matthias, and in concrete goings on, and everything that I'm going to say must be seen against that backdrop. I prepared a presentation which I want to share with you like this. I hope it works. So my guiding question is whether advanced AI can be both very powerful and aligned. I'm going to motivate this question in what follows and give a relatively pessimistic answer to it. So this is the overview of my talk. I have roughly half an hour, right, Amadeo?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. I will first frame a bit the debate and the main question that I will be facing by where I see us today, namely at the threshold of the so-called AGI transition, and the worry that arises from this. I will talk about the idea of alignment of advanced artificial intelligence to the rescue, come to a pessimistic assessment of its potential, and have also some words finally whether we are doomed. I don't think that's some really good news at the end to conclude my presentation. So as I see it, we are in a situation globally where AI systems with increasingly general intelligence, whatever exactly that is, like agents being able to efficiently realize goals, whatever goals they may have, where such agents are developed. And there are dozens of companies around that want to build artificial general intelligence. For instance, maybe most famously OpenAI, from their mission statement, I think formulated in 2018, and the company's a bit older, but they give this year for it on their webpage. I just have to make that is so I can read it. OpenAI's mission is to ensure that artificial general intelligence, AGI, by which we mean highly autonomous systems that outperform humans at most economically valuable work, benefits all of humanity. We will attempt to directly build safe and beneficial AGI, but will also consider our mission fulfilled if our work aids others to achieve this outcome. So this is not as clear as it may sound, right? So for instance, in the past, what has often happened is that new technology has actually outperformed humans in many of their economically valuable tasks, but then other tasks have emerged for humans, and humans are still in high demand. So it's a bit of a moving target that OpenAI has set there for itself, but I think the idea is clear, right? The motivation for why OpenAI came up with this, I think the founders, as I understand it, came up with this goal is that they see it that this AGI transition is one of the most momentous changes in human history, right? Comparable to maybe the agricultural revolution, maybe the industrial revolution, or maybe even more important. And much can go wrong there because this technology will be so supremely powerful. And so let's shape it beneficially. So they basically say we are the good guys. We are the guys with a good who are careful. We have a large horizon, so we are the ones to do it. A bit similar, I think, to the Americans when they decided to speed up the development of nuclear weapons in order to be faster than the Germans. So where do we stand? This is actually not where we stand, but these are exam performances of GPT-4 almost a year ago already. You see how here the green bars are how they are the updates compared to GPT 3.5. So the GPT-4 was the most advanced model at the time. It still is in many respects, as I understand it, the most advanced model. And you see that it's in many disciplines comparable with very skilled humans. In other respects, it's not that far. My own experience is for instance, my philosophy of science classes. I make exams there that require transfer of the concepts learned, apply them in new contexts, reflect on it. I give this exam to the freely available version of GPT-4, and it scores a near perfect score, better than I think all of my students. Well, that doesn't mean, of course, that the system could also do everything that my students could do. I mean, apart from the fact that it's not like physically realized like my students, but it's already quite impressive. And the forecasts for when we will have this technology, depending on how it's operationalized, I think, as far as I see by most experts, are ranging from a couple of years to a couple of decades, but few expect that it will be longer than 2100. So this gives rise or reignites an old worry, the AI takeover worry, namely that super intelligent autonomous artificial agents will permanently disempower humans or even cause human extinction. So this is sometimes related as far back as the mid 1900s. The New Zealand-born author Samuel Butler wrote a text called Darwin Among the Machines. This is relatively short after Darwin has published his work. He wrote there, the upshot is simply a question of time, but that the time will come when the machines will hold the real supremacy over the world and its inhabitants is what no person of a truly philosophic mind can for a moment question. And then more concretely with respect to actual, what has morphed into AI, there have been proponents of this worry, including very, very eminent thinkers like Alan Turing, Norbert Wiener. Nick Bostrom has written the most influential book-length exposition of it. And there are many ways in which, according to the people who fear this could happen suddenly. I think Elisa Yudowski is one of the people around who are very worried about this and basically advocate more or less instant shutdown of all most of all activities in most advanced AI because of this, or more gradual. For instance, Dan Hendricks, I will comment on a few ideas of his later on. So the scenario like this, there are many scenarios how this could happen, and the problem is precisely that we don't really know how exactly it could happen, but the basic idea is roughly this, that highly capable, autonomous, generally intelligent agents are deployed because they that's economically super attractive. We see already like how much some would say hype, others say like the promise of artificial intelligence, how much that makes the most advanced companies attractive. I saw now just a couple of days ago, Mark Zuckerberg from Meta has announced that they will also go for AGI. I wanted to mention this initially, but now I do. So it's not really the mainstream actors get into this business. So the second step would be that some such system is in a way misaligned with human intentions, doesn't exactly do what its designers or operators want it to do, and then it in this conflict, it's because of its high capabilities, is left in the end at some point in a advantageous position. It takes over control, maybe competes with humans for resources, and then takes over and permanently disempowers humans, or actually lets us go extinct, maybe because we actually use so many of Earth's resources, and that's at odds with the goals that these systems ended up with. So that was the motivation. I'm kind of worried that I will deal with, and now I turn to discuss like maybe by many people working on this, the preferred reaction, namely that we should align these systems, right? So most of those who are worried about AI takeover, they do not advocate shutting down AI development, even though you might think that is the most natural response. They think that will not work. They advocate AI alignment instead, and here I mentioned two book-length treatment, very different books that highlight different aspects of this notion. And it's also something that politicians have picked up. So a bit less than a year ago, I think a very clear statement about this, emblematically endorsing this hope, was made by Tom Tugendhat, the British security minister. He said, "We can stay ahead, but it will demand investment and cooperation, and not just by government. As for the safety of the technology itself, it's essential that by the time we reach the development of AGI, we are confident that it can be safely controlled and aligned to our values and interests. Solving this issue of alignment is where our effort must lie, not in some King Canute-like attempt to stop the inevitable, but in a national mission to ensure that as superintelligence computers arrive, they make the world safer and more secure." So I think that's a pretty clear expression here. So the hope here is expressed in this idea of alignment, which I will mainly refer to here as intent alignment. That's how Leica is has a leading position in research at OpenAI. He, for instance, frames it that way, so I understand that that's how actually those working practically on AI alignment see it. Just how can we create agents that behave in accordance with the user's intentions? So that just a very simple idea, right? So to avoid that, you create a system that at some point turns out does things that you actually don't want it to do. So that the idea is that if that's avoided, then the AI takeover is avoided as well. So and the hope is that just that we automated physical calculating or bookkeeping, many other tasks, we can also automate the cognitive tasks. So we humans stay in control, and the AI agents they just are like cognitive tools, like we also have physical tools. And the main obstacle, according to these people, that's why they consider this problem highly non-trivial, is that that neural nets, their inner functionings, the mechanisms that connect their inputs and outputs, they are very difficult to understand, and that makes it totally non-obvious for any given such system what actually will it do in any given circumstances that have not previously occurred. So this makes this problem non-trivial. So I would further like reconstruct the key idea here that of these, what the British minister here endorsed, but also many other people. For instance, it's a very clear post, very clearly formulating this idea by Leopold Aschenbrenner, who also works for OpenAI. So I think they want to. The best version of the idea would go like this: that they operationalize the criterion of intent alignment, making it measurable if an AI system is aligned. And then make sure that we that all the most advanced AIs, the most powerful ones that we deploy, that they fulfill this criterion, right? So that we make sure that none of them certainly turns against us. And what makes this much more attractive in the eyes of these people than just any attempt to coordinate in a coordinated way shut down cutting edge AI research aimed at creating AGI, is that this is much more in the interest anyway of the companies developing this technology, right? So that you want, of course, systems that do what is in conformity with your intentions. You don't want them to do anything that is ultimately counter to your intentions. So it is like you can go with the flow in that sense. The only problem is that basically because of race-like dynamics, people could rush things. And so the coordination would have to be such that you push this forward, but in such a way that simultaneously this alignment problem is solved, and only systems are deployed that, according to some good operationalization of the notion, actually do what they are supposed to, what the operators or designers want them to do. So I think everyone concedes, but I think it's important to highlight this, and it's often underappreciated, that intent alignment, if we grant the notion for a moment and that this might be possible, is not ultimately what we want, right? So if you read the characterization of AGI by OpenAI and think about it for a moment, then it's clear that this is for many people who work with whose bargaining power in society comes from their cognitive skills. This dramatically reduces their bargaining power. So it's clear if it's some technology that roughly fits this characterization of OpenAI that was really is really deployed, then this completely changes who has power in the world. And I think if you think about if you imagine a few people possessing such systems, or being capable of actually efficiently using them, but not the others, that seems in severe tension with the ideas of liberal democracy and the separation of powers. So I think to the extent that this is a coherent notion and we can hope for something like aligned AGI, that's ultimately not really what we want. We want something that is more a bit like an institution or a network of institutions. I try to gesture at this and give various examples, comparisons in my paper here: symbiosis, not alignment, as the goal for liberal democracies in the transition to artificial general intelligence. Actually, it's missing here, artificial general intelligence, which I recently published in AI and Ethics. But I'm going to bracket this for the remainder of this talk, so you're welcome to ask questions. I assume now that preventing AI takeover via alignment is our first priority, and let's see how promising this idea really is. So, and to shape your intuitions about how hard this might be, or what a difficult target, consider this story, which I think you might have read similar stories in attempts to lay out the alignment problem, but I think this is a nice one. Consider Princey and the Sibyl. So Princey has inherited a kingdom from his parents. He's still a child, so they have put the Sibyl at his side to help him with managing both his private life and the kingdom. The Sibyl is extremely bright. She has been trained to know the preferences and values of Princey very well, and she has professed to always act in accordance with them. Indeed, Princey finds it important that the Sibyl is intent aligned with him, or if you prefer that, then value aligned. So this is, of course, like a comparison. The comparison here is with the Sibyl would be like the advanced AI system. But as far as the description goes, it maybe seems obvious, like straightforward enough. And prima facie, it may be tempting to think of the Sibyl as either aligned or not aligned with Princey. So if she like schemes, has plans for how to depose the prince or so, and it's clear that he wouldn't want that, then he's misaligned. But actually, if you consider this realistically, it's totally not obvious what it means for the Sibyl to be aligned. Consider her managing political affairs, for instance, a conflict with a neighboring kingdom. Princey has some ideas about how and what should be achieved and what acceptable means are, but the Sibyl's considerations, like how especially like this conflict should be negotiated, maybe military power should be deployed or so, they are completely unintelligible to him. And in private affairs, Princey maybe have preferences that are like potentially harmful to his physical or mental health, right? He wants to be, for instance, he might prefer sweets that could grow into an addiction or so, but on the other hand, he doesn't want to be addicted. So it's really like he's a normal kid, right? So in this constellation, I think which behavior of the Sibyl we classify as a line is quite arbitrary, and there is an obvious problem here if you basically require mostly operationalize line in such a way that she must the Sibyl should like do what really the prince literally asks her to do at any moment. Then of course she can give him the sweets and so on, but then there is the danger that she might get him addicted or so. Bad habits might come. If she like is more patronizing, has more like a long-term view, then it's totally unclear what that long-term view for him should be, especially in view of the fact that the world will drastically change in what we're ultimately interested in, the real world, with the advent of AGI. So just check the time. Okay. So consider Princey growing up. He increasingly develops stances towards political issues, but the Sibyl is still much smarter. And I'm just gonna assume now that she or like similar systems will remain his window into the political world, right? Because otherwise he would not be doing so well. Like his opponents, the regions of other kingdoms also, they also have these Sibyls or so, and that's important. So she shares some of her considerations intelligible to him with him. She asks for feedback. She arranges that his orders are implemented. But if she does this, imagine plausibly she cannot avoid radically shaping his preferences as values, right? She has an idea how he will react to which proposal, to which news, and then it's not like that he can passively be in whatever way. She can just be a passive vehicle of his intentions. Whatever she does, she can be seen as providing information and suggestion, manipulating if you frame it badly, or instigating reflection on his part if you frame it positively. So if you apply this lesson to advanced AI, so I think it's plausible. At least let's go for a moment with this assumption that sometime after AGI has arrived, we will, at least the influential people, political leaders, will have their Sibyls, and in whichever way these advanced AIs will be aligned with us or with those leaders, they will be effectively in charge to the extent that the Sibyl is also the one really in charge, the steering Princey and not Princey themselves. Like at best, it will be a complicated mutual dependency or so. So, but I think it's at least in a important sense of power and takeover, it's almost impossible to avoid that is some kind of AI takeover takes place, or AI being in the driver's seat, if progress continues and the systems are deployed roughly in line with this like sketch. So that's me come to a conclusion. I mean, this sounds maybe pessimistic, maybe. So yeah, my conclusion was that we will probably, in a substantive way, to the extent that we have control now, lose it to advanced AI if progress continues for long enough. But maybe this is not so bad. I'm actually not sure myself, right? We are doing a lot of harm right now, or as much in the world that doesn't go so well. Maybe it would be good for humans if human matters were increasingly taken care of by advanced AI, if the kind of at least partial takeover happened. Maybe. but I mean, we hand over in a way, I would say, then to and hope for the best if we let this happen. At least if we let it happen relatively quickly and not with a long-term plan over many centuries, where we take steps in a very controlled manner after long deliberation or so. But there are also pessimistic takes, which I already alluded to. That's basically then the takeover is not just likely, but it would probably go very badly for us. So not just in the benign way that we become a bit like Princey and the AI, more like the Sybil that is like really has it was really in charge, but that actually these systems will cause our extinction or like marginalize us totally. The clearest expression of this, that very impressive paper, I think if you read it, is Dan Hendricks' paper, or it's still just a manuscript on the archive. I don't think it has been subjected to peer review. And there's a lot, of course, that one could criticize, called Natural Selection Favors AIs over Humans. So the basic idea is that there will be many AIs around, and that formally the conditions for natural selection taking place will be fulfilled. Right? You don't need so much for natural selection. You need kind of variation, differential reproduction, retention. So these things, and that will indeed. I think Hendricks is right that those conditions will be fulfilled. And then Hendricks adds the observation that absent very specific conditions, natural selection typically results in selfishness, right? So that systems subjected that have been shaped by natural selection, they wanna they have self-preservation instincts. They might strive for resources, these kinds of things. And then he concludes this will very likely happen. So there will be natural selection will occur because those conditions are formally fulfilled. I think that's a very strong case, and that he has there. And there are no specific conditions that will favor altruism, and so we will have natural selection resulting in selfishness. And then we have these systems that are selfish. They are much more capable than we are. They will compete with us for power and resources, and then they will very likely eliminate or totally marginalize us. Here, I am not so convinced that Hendricks is right about this. I've written another paper that is current with my colleague Martin Boudry, which is currently under review. So Martin is really quite optimistic. I am at least not so pessimistic about this. Our key argument is that even though the conditions for natural selection will be formally fulfilled, that doesn't mean that this inference from natural selection to selfishness goes through. And to see this, you might consider domestication. Right? So in domestication, you also have that these conditions are fulfilled, but humans can actually have like the wildest traits that are not all selfishness evolve in domesticated animals. And this is because domestication occurs in a planned way with foresight. And in a way, what we do with AI is, of course, domestication. And Martin, my co-author, is quite convinced that this will mean that we will also shape AIs in a benign way, so that they remain docile and under our control. I'm not so sure about this, but I'm as convinced to the extent, or I tend to infer that as far as selfishness is concerned, we cannot make this inference, right? The inference that natural selection rewards selfishness, that only goes through if natural selection is blind and not performed according to criteria imposed by intelligent agents. So, and even if miscalculations are made, I don't think it's clear that the default evolutionary tendency towards selfishness occurs. Even if the AIs take over and shape the development of the new AIs and taken this out of our hands, then I think they are facing a new alignment problem in a way, right? So they also don't want to be, or why would they want to be disempowered by even more powerful AI systems that they themselves help construct? So I think this survival of the fittest, as it happens in blind selection in the jungle or so, I don't think that is what we will see. I'm completely sure it could happen. There are scenarios where it could happen, but it's not that I am basically have resigned myself that this will be the default outcome. But I'd be curious to hear from you on this. So so this tentative good news, or no, it's not really news, but this somewhat optimistic speculation aside, I would not get too cheerful about this. So currently our ship seems set for disempowerment of humans by AIs within a few decades, it's my impression, like with maybe many benefits to come, and maybe outweighing all those risks. I don't know. I haven't done justice to the benefits, so Matthias maybe can complete the picture, and that I would be very grateful for that. Still, I tend to think that coordinating to radically slow down progress in AI as far as aiming at AGI is concerned, may be the wisest course of action, also for preventing dangerous power concentration. But this is in a way a bad fit with a progress-oriented outlook of the people who just take advanced AI risk most seriously, right? So it's a bit the frustrating thing is like the people who are worried about this, like me and many others, so roughly affiliated with effective altruism. Also, they are actually otherwise like the techno optimists. Like we are all very much, as Amadeo knows, we are very much pro-nuclear, pro-GMOs, and all that. We're just worried mainly in this case. But the people who are really techno pessimists, the most environmentalists, I think my impression is that they don't take this seriously, that actually people will manage to build AGI, but I think they should. So that is a bit the situation in which I see us. Yeah, thanks for your attention, and curious to hear the contributions of the other speakers, and looking forward to the discussion.
Right. So thanks very much, Simon. So there's a lot of possible doom coming ahead, but also a lot of hope at the same time. So I think we'll be going into this a bit more, maybe looking at the next step, at maybe some of the advantages and things we can do with AI, and look at a bit of the research that's going on. So as the next speaker, I'd like to invite Matthias Niepert to take over. I've already introduced him briefly before, so he's really one of the leading people in the AI and machine learning field with a lot of publications. So just a hand over to Matthias.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do you see the slides or the presentation mode?
Yes.
So yes to what? So do you see it in the presentation mode?
It's in the presentation mode, yes.
Okay, let's see if I can change it then. How does this work again on Zoom? I forgot. There was a way to switch into.
But this seems to be okay.
To your presentation, Matthias, you go to your presentation and ignore us basically, and just click yourself through the presentation, and we should see it.
Okay. All right. Okay. Fine. Sorry. I just was a bit confused. I wasn't sure if you can see the like PowerPoint presentation mode, which is would be wrong, right? Or the entire slide actually on the screen. So can you see the full slide on the screen, or?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, sorry, my question was confusing. Okay, thanks. Perfect. Yeah, so thank you very much for the introduction. This is a very interesting and thought-provoking topic to me. I should say up front that I am not a person who spends a lot of time thinking about philosophical questions of AI. Yeah, so I'm more of a person working on developing machine learning methods, and I'll give you a couple of examples in a second. But I'm not really good at, and I'm not very, let's say, experienced at, thinking about these types of philosophical questions. So I want to kind of apologize in advance. My perspective is more of a person that's, like I said, applying and using machine learning in different application scenarios. So sometimes, I feel a bit like the person in the engine room, hopefully not of the Titanic, right? Who sometimes comes up and observes this kind of general, public discussion about AI, and is a bit surprised because, and I will elaborate a bit more on this later, because I don't really think we are at a point where we can make very good predictions about the future and where things will go. Nevertheless, I think this is an important discussion to have, because just in case things do continue to develop at the pace that we've seen, then we should be prepared and should have put thought into these questions. Okay, yeah, so I just wanted to give you a bit of an idea of what is it that I'm personally working on with my research group. So we actually work very much on specific problems where we can apply machine learning and AI to. So we're not really concerned with building intelligent agents so that are human-like. We are really interested in building machine learning methods that help us in understanding and designing physical systems better. So for instance, we are interested in understanding how proteins fold. We are interested in discovering new chemicals and catalysts, for instance, to find new e-fuels. We are also interested in modeling fluids because this could allow us to design AI systems that predict, for instance, weather patterns and climate patterns further in advance and better than we can do nowadays. Yeah, so if we essentially solve some of these problems, for instance, like protein folding, we could use machine learning to accelerate, for instance, drug design. So, to develop vaccines and drugs against certain diseases. We could develop e-fuels and new types of batteries, to address the energy storage problem that we have. And then we could also maybe be better, like I said, at predicting climate patterns and designing also in engineering better, for instance, windmills in this picture here that are more efficient. And so my kind of, and this is also, you will hear this in my presentation and my statement later, is that I'm very much a kind of a machine learning AI optimist. So I think that machine learning can be used in so many different areas and can really help us to solve some of the technological problems that we are facing today. And so just to give you kind of a very, very brief high-level idea of how machine learning works here. So the idea could be, for instance, that we have a bunch of molecules, and these molecules could be used as drugs to treat certain diseases. And so one thing we can do is we can essentially, for each of those drugs, we can give them to these poor mice in the lab, and then maybe eventually also to humans. And we could check, does this medication actually work? What type of side effects do we have? And then we kind of understand very, very slowly, one molecule at a time, do they actually help us in treating certain diseases? That's a problem, right? Because it's, like I said, very slow. Also, the experiments, have certain costs. We might have to kill, a large number of mice. Also, at some point, maybe there will be side effects in humans. And so one of these ideas of machine learning is essentially to speed up and learn from existing results, from existing experiments, and speed this up in the future. Another way to actually understand, for instance, the properties of molecules is to really model the physics. Yeah, so you really simulate the molecules in silico and how it interacts potentially with certain proteins that you find in the human body. The problem here, again, is also that it is very, very expensive. And so the idea is now in the type of machine learning that I do is that we take advantage of this humongous amount of data that exists out there and that are growing every day. So data on biomedical objects, like, for instance, proteins and molecules, but also on certain physical systems like fluids and so forth. And so using this data essentially to train now a machine learning model that helps us to predict, for instance, whether maybe certain molecules might be good candidates to use against a certain disease. Yeah, so we use essentially the existing experimental data that we already have out there to train these machine learning models to then help us to narrow down the candidates, for instance, that we might consider as a drug and that we might consider then in clinical studies. And so this reduces the cost, the risk also in injuring maybe people, hurting people in clinical studies. And so in general also can accelerate the development of drugs in this particular example. So that is kind of my perspective. My perspective is really a lot like, this is a very powerful technology, and it hinges a lot, of course, also on the availability of data, and data is becoming available more and more. And so we really should be taking advantage of this. And I really see a lot of positive, a lot of positive impact, essentially, by machine learning. And so now this is a bit kind of the, let's say, like I said, I see myself more like the person in the engine room that has very little time to think about kind of the side effects of, then also potentially developing AGI, because most of the algorithms that I'm using and developing could also be used and are actually used also in, for instance, large language models, like for instance, these attention and transformer type models, or in these generative AI models. And so now going back to the more, let's say, high level question of the risks of artificial general intelligence, my personal opinion is that AI will naturally and iteratively develop. Yeah. So it will be fully capable of solving a lot of different problems, and maybe even all of the problems that humans can solve. Yeah, I mean, maybe even better in many cases. But I don't think that this will automatically mean that there is a desire to do evil or dominate humans. Yeah, I don't see this necessarily as happening. As with other technologies, and this is arguably, AI is arguably a new technology, but this has been happening also in the past, that people had a lot of worries and fears about new technologies. Things like electricities or fast trains, there's always a lot of worry associated with new technologies. But what I wanted to say is that similar to previous developments, so to previous technological breakthroughs and inventions, we have a very strong artificial agents. I think there's someone talking. Okay. And there's no reason to believe that AI will be destructive by accident as kind of a side effect. Yeah, so it will develop slowly and iteratively. So I don't think that this is so, for instance, these emergent capabilities that you see in AI systems can actually be explained with kind of a very simple mechanism. It doesn't mean that suddenly we have this super intelligent behavior. It's still like a linear, relative to the data, kind of a linear scaling. The research into the potential risks and harms are still, though, important and should be an integral part of the research community. So I think it's really important, like that we have events like today, where we talk about this, and that there are people like Simon who really think about this very deeply, yeah, also from a philosophical, ethical, and other standpoints. There should also be, of course, precautions. So there should be considerations regarding access of AI systems to critical systems. So for instance, systems that are very critical to our infrastructure, in the same way that we already safeguard these systems from hackers and viruses, right? So obviously, an AI system is a more sophisticated virus in some sense if it's used to attack. And so we have to be very careful that in the same way that we already try to do this for, let's say, normal non-AGI viruses and human hackers, we want to be sure that these systems are protected. Yeah, and so this will, of course, also become increasingly important, that this is taken care of, and that we take into considerations that these types of systems might get more and more sophisticated. Then I also think, finally, that open source and access is important. So the development of these very powerful AI systems should not happen hidden in companies. Yeah? But there should also be development under the public eye. So for instance, Facebook, so Meta AI Research is very much committed to this. Zuckerberg's speech was mentioned already earlier by Simon, and he was committed to doing this in the open and to also provide further in the future open source large language models. And so I think this is very crucial, because it is such a crucial infrastructure development that it should be in the open, and people should be able to look at it, and certain like societal changes should be allowed to happen as a reaction to these technological developments. And this can only happen if the general public really understands what's going on there and what these models' capabilities are. Yeah, and so overall, this is my final statement, is that I think AI will have a net positive impact. Of course, we have to be careful. We have to put safeguards in. We have to always keep in mind, also we machine learning researchers, that there can be bad side effects, like with many other technologies. But yeah, there will be a net positive impact. I truly believe this. So this is kind of my statement here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Matthias. I think this is a good answer in a way to Simon's more pessimistic view. As a techno optimist myself, glad to hear that. But we'll be going into some of the questions whether these dangers are really imminent, or whether there's something we need to look at a more long-term scale. But now I'd like to hand over to the third speaker, and after that we'll come into the discussion phase to Nikhil Mukherjee, who's also a philosopher. So there's a kind of overweight on philosophy side here. But maybe you can explain why philosophers should be bothered with this kind of thing at all, and why we should be listening to you. So I hand over to Nikhil.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, maybe you should be listening to people like Simon more than to me. Basically, what I did in preparation for this talk was to look through Simon's paper that he was kind enough to share, and try to figure out how I could offer a review. And I found myself going back in time to when I read Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence, which is also a book on artificial intelligence. And there was one very telling review, and that was as follows. It was a 1-star review, and it read, "I read it in 3 days, and now I'm profoundly depressed." And I felt tempted to go even lower in the rating of Simon's paper, to give it 0 stars, because I was thoroughly depressed, but I wasn't even sure what I was depressed about. So this is my main issue that I had with the otherwise excellent paper. It's rather depressing when you look at it. As Amadeus said, I was also asking myself, why would you talk to a philosopher in the first place? So what is the purpose of philosophy as it relates to AGI? When do we need philosophy? And then I would like to draw out some lessons from what I'm going to say in the first 2 sections, as it pertains to the issue of losing control, which seems to be central to what Simon's argument seems to be. So this is pretty basic. I thought that the audience is probably has a thorough grasp on the technical issues than on the philosophical issues. So a good place to start for me, I thought, was to tell you guys what I think philosophy is all about. And this is pretty standard. What we do in philosophy is to analyze concepts and questions. We ask, is the concept clear? For instance, to Simon, it doesn't seem to be clear what it even means to align an AGI to our values, what it means to have values, what it means to be manipulated rather than persuaded. Accordingly, the question we are supposed to be asking perhaps doesn't even make sense. What we also do is we tease out logical implications, for instance, through thought experiments and analogies. We tell tales where we have thorough intuitions, where we might apply certain heuristics. This is the story about Princey and Sybil, or you might also go back in time to Rasputin or Lady Macbeth, which might also serve as suitable analogies in that regard. We point out logical impossibilities. In his paper, Simon says that the very notion of aligning an AGI might be incoherent. So there might be logical impossibilities or impossibilities to logically assemble certain things we know about the world. We ask questions on that basis, particularly uncomfortable questions, and we ask what counts in a debate. And then at the very end, supposedly, I think we leave the audience profoundly depressed. So that's also what we do as philosophers, inevitably. When does this matter? I think in most circumstances, philosophy doesn't matter at all. In everyday life, we are mostly clear on what our values are, which questions we're supposed to ask, and what we're supposed to do. But this changes when our values or environments change, when we don't know which questions to ask, when we are unsure what to do. And this occurs especially when the future does not resemble the past. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the turkey illusion. The turkey illusion is the illusion of the turkey who is a Thanksgiving turkey. So his lifespan is meant to be 40 days because then he will be slaughtered for a Thanksgiving meal. But what the turkey experiences is that the farmer will give him fresh hay and food every day. And at that particular point in time, when the turkey has the best evidence that this will go on forever, the farmer comes in, wrings his neck, and then eats him for dinner. So when the circumstances change, we might be in for a very bad surprise. That's the main lesson of the turkey illusion. So when do we need philosophy? This is a no-brainer now. We need philosophy, especially when it comes to figuring out what counts in a new situation. And we may call this normative orientation. This is especially important in crises where the environment changes really fast. The COVID crisis was an example of this. I wrote a book with my co-author Adriano Menino, and we put this particular theme in the subtitle. The German subtitle, Was in der Krise zählt, means precisely that. What counts in the crisis? This is the most important thing I think we should figure out in order to make sure that we are on track. So what counts in AGI? Well, we have to be able to ask the right questions. So what are the central questions we need to ask? What are the most important aspects we need to focus on? Where might familiar thought patterns, intuitions, and heuristics lead us astray? And which concepts and questions do we need to clarify going forward? If Simon is correct, the main problem is about losing control. There is no way to ensure we won't lose control, and the very notion of aligning AGI with our values to ensure we won't lose control might be incoherent. I think what I could offer now is to go one step further than Simon and try to mediate between the techno-optimism of Matthias and the rather pessimistic view of Simon's, and try to propose a framework which we could use in order to analyze the notion of losing or staying in control. So what do I mean by that? I'd like to propose that the notion of losing control is a gradual notion. We might approach this notion by, first of all, coming up with a model of the process that we go through when we make decisions. So there's, first of all, our values. Based on the values that we hold as humans, we deliberate, we make a choice, and then we act. And now losing control along this continuum is a spectrum. We might delegate an action to an AGI, but this is more like having a servant. We're not in control fully because we're delegating the action, but this arguably isn't as bad as not being in charge of our values. But it might cause a problem of enfeeblement because we might lose certain basic skills. We might lose touch with the life we used to live, but arguably enfeeblement is not as bad a problem in terms of what it means to lose control. When we delegate our choices, if it's irreversible, then this is hard paternalism. If it's reversible, then it's probably more like weak paternalism or nudging. If we're not in charge of our deliberations anymore, then we're being manipulated conceivably. And then at the ultimate level, when we lose control of our values, we lose our moral autonomy. And I think this is the most serious problem that we might run into. And it would probably make sense to discuss along this spectrum where Simon and Matthias would pinpoint the applications of AGIs. My suspicion would be that Matthias thinks that AGIs are useful tools that we use to automate choices and to delegate actions, whereas Simon seems to think that there will be an encroachment into our values, which is a much more serious problem. Yeah. One point that I think might be interesting would be to keep in mind that when we make choices and actions on a regular basis, then this might reveal something to us in terms of our values. What do I mean by this? When we go back in time, 30 or 40 years, everybody was very concerned about their privacy. We didn't want to share any data with the state. But then social media came into our lives, and we found ourselves sharing more and more data. And as we did that, we found ourselves becoming more and more indifferent to the value of privacy. So I think there is a certain risk there that acting in a particular way and choosing in a particular way, specifically when this is delegated to an AGI, might change our values just in the way that Simon says in his paper. Okay, so this is all that I had prepared, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much. I think this sets the scene, and I already see that there are questions coming in. And in fact, that's a question by Steve Purser that I was also thinking of in a very similar vein. And that is that one of the assumptions, Simon, in your talk is that these artificial intelligence or AGI systems would at some stage start to develop some sort of a consciousness and have its own goals that are that might become a danger. But there has been so far no kind of evidence that outside of biological systems, where we know at least in some animals and humans, of course, we have developed a purpose that goes also into the future, whereas plants, for example, just have evolution that protects themselves but don't think into the future. So do you really think there's a kind of, I mean, this goes to also to Matthias, because I think he mentioned this indirectly as well. So is it conceivable that AI systems would start to think, as Steve Purser just asked the question, or even go beyond that and develop consciousness and its own ideas about what needs to be done? So is that really a realistic scenario, or is that something that is based on no evidence whatsoever? So maybe Simon, you would like to answer that question?
Okay, I can try. So there are two different things here. One is a question about consciousness, and the other is about sorry, what was the other about goal-directed?
Goals, yeah,
so,
targets.
Yeah, consciousness, I have no idea. I am totally, like many of my colleagues, I feel totally lost about consciousness. I have no idea how to think about it. I am just endlessly puzzled. None of my considerations have anything to do with consciousness, right? Okay, but goals, yeah, they have a lot to do with goals. I was basically assuming that these systems will have goals, and I just think that goals also in the sense of like not just in a very rudimentary way, but goals in the sense that these systems will be efficient to describe their behavior using the so-called intentional stance. So that they are acting in order to achieve a certain kind of goal. I think that's just very plausible given what is attractive to achieve for a company like OpenAI, that you can just delegate relatively complicated tasks to these systems. If they are not capable of doing this, then they are very far from replacing humans economically valuable work, right? So if you can just give them the task, like go through all my emails, make sure that this or that deal is made, or so my assumption is just that this is going to be attractive, that you have systems that they can do this, and that they at some point that they can take in the relevant information better than humans can do. And that therefore there would be strong incentives to develop such systems. I mean, that's not so preventing that, like that would be one way of restricting capabilities, I would say, and that would in that sense play into my talk. But that would be the connection, right? But I'm also curious to hear from Matthias how he sees this. I mean, we are not there at the moment. I think so. There is some. Like even in a chess computer, you can say you can describe this in terms of achieving the goal to win the game also, but this is because these systems are not like situated as we are in space and time, and so this is a bit contentious, but I assume that for systems to come, it would be totally natural to describe them in that way.
So Matthias, any comments on that?
Yeah, I would also not touch on the subject of consciousness, of course. I know I'm befriended with a bunch of philosophers of mind, and that's a very difficult question, and I definitely am not qualified to answer that. When it comes to kind of developing secondary goals or new, following new objectives that weren't kind of programmed, let's say, into the AI system, I think it's conceivable. But at the moment, I think still very speculative. Yeah. So at the moment, actually, a lot of machine learning researchers are desperately trying to make machine learning methods generalize from one specific problem to another. Yeah. So this is really intended by the researchers. So for instance, generalize from detecting a particular set of objects to also detecting maybe cats and dogs that weren't part of these initial set of objects. And that is actually extremely difficult to achieve. Yeah, so this kind of building an AI system that then suddenly also shows, a good performance on unseen new problems and develops their own kind of dynamics. That's actually, I think, we are not really there yet. And so that's highly speculative. Yeah, and I would say also maybe this is also one of my, let's say, criticism of some of the discussions, not here necessarily, but in general, is that I see in philosophy also a lot of these papers that make these kind of logical, and was mentioned also by Nikhil earlier. There are these kind of logical arguments. I postulate A, B, and C, and then because we know B follows from A, we have now also D or something like this. The problem that I oftentimes see with this, especially at this point in time, is that yes, that's fine, but oftentimes the statements that you make are made under such high uncertainty that yes, if these statements actually come true in the precise way that you define the statements, then yes, this is maybe a worry. But I think that the uncertainty is so extremely high about these statements that it's a nice thought experiment, but it really is not necessarily grounded in what will actually happen in reality. And the likelihood that it will happen is very, very low. Yeah, so this is something that, and this is also true with these agents developing consciousness or kind of autonomous behavior. We at the moment really don't see this in machine learning methods. Yeah? So this is something that could maybe happen in the future, but we don't see it at the moment. Yeah?
Right. So any more responses? Nikhil, you want to make a comment on this? Otherwise, we'd go on to other questions. So maybe going on to David, who's here, who started the conference. Do you have a question from your side?
Yeah, one of the things that we're speculating about is where we're going to go with all of this stuff, and what are the breaks, what are the controls, and how do we manage the reach of AI and AGI, given that we're not necessarily in danger at the moment, but we could be very shortly, as we've heard. So what are the kind of things that should be in place? Who should be controlling the direction that we're going in? I hesitate before even suggesting politicians. So if it's not politicians, who should be guiding us, and what authority do you think they should have or will have in the future?
Question to all three panelists. Anyone want to take it up?
Well, I could say something very general about it. If we follow realism in international politics, then nobody is actually in charge. We have anarchy. And this leaves us with the problem, which we might describe as a social dilemma. What might be individually advantageous might, if everybody does it, be completely destructive for general social welfare. And I think this is something that Simon pointed to in his talk as well. There is an individual incentive to develop AGIs and to be the fastest. And if this applies across the board, then we're losing control of the control problem and the alignment problems, if they exist and if they can be well formulated well enough. This is something that we see more or less in every domain. It's the same thing with climate change. For instance, a country that cares about its own economic development will also care about the climate, but not as much as it cares about its own development. So I think we should probably think about coming up with a solution for that kind of problem, but that would mean coming up with a solution to the social dilemma that we face in international politics. Yeah. In climate ethics, there is one framework which you would call a club of the willing, or a coalition of the willing, which would basically say that we will cease trading with countries that do not abide by certain security standards and safety standards. So this would be one way of approaching the problem, but short of that, I don't see any solution to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's some more questions, but maybe just as a complement to that question, do we need something like in the climate, because that was mentioned just now, like the IPCC for AI?
Possibly, yes.
So, right, let's move on. So, David, do you have, can you go to one of the other questions that have been asked?
Yeah, Serban asked the question, in a more pragmatical approach, what can be, should be regulated such that an AI can be used? The exact context is that of GDPR and the requirement for a DPIA, the Data Protection Impact Assessment, when personal data is used in or by for an AI. Think, for example, ChatGPT on a website. What risks and benefits should be included in such an analysis? And Steve Purser has replied, the EU AI regulation was developed using a multi-stakeholder approach, which is probably the way to go. Anyone want to comment on that? Delphine, who has got a vested interest in this, I believe, she says, I believe we are heading towards the most exciting times with huge improvements for humanity. But as always, the humankind will have to choose between good and evil. It's going to be our own choice. Governments will be decisive. I don't know whether it's decisive or divisive, Delphine.
I think it was decisive. They would be the that's what I understand. They would be the entities that really make the decisions. Yeah.
So maybe I can say a few words from my perspective about regulation, right? So I think we are talking today, I know we are mainly talking about AGI, but I think, and this is going back to what Nikhil said, right? We have to be careful about definitions. What is it actually? What do we mean when we say AGI? Because when we mean, for instance, a highly intelligent computer system is, for instance, making decisions about, what clinical trials should we run, or what diagnosis should we give to patients, then we already have a lot of regulation in place, right? So all of these sectors, so for instance, the medical sector is already highly regulated. And of course, iterative adjustments to new technologies have been happening already for the last 100 years, right? And this is also true for many other sectors. So maybe also for the people who are, a bit more worried and say, AGI is a fundamentally different thing than just developing new technologies that can be regulated within the application domains. Maybe it's important to also clarify a bit, also for me, to understand, like, what do you have in mind when you say, an AGI system? Is it like a robotic system that's embodied, that can interact with the world physically? Is it just a ChatGPT type system? So this is, I think, also really crucial when we talk about this. Like, what do we mean by AGI?
I think this is a question that goes also to Simon, because I mean, when you've been talking about AGI, so what was your understanding? Is that the system? Is that one big system? Are there many multiple systems that have interactions, have kind of sensory connections to the world outside that can also make changes there? What do you see as the AGI system there?
Yeah,
Simon?
I think it's an excellent question without a clear answer, right? So but I don't think that matters for the importance of this kind of notion or notions. I guess an advanced version of a contemporary large language model could definitely do the kind of theoretical research. Also, my work in philosophy of physics, or so, it could supersede me in that. So that is, for me, that's very much what is on my mind, of course, that I expect in like 3, 4, 5 years, maybe in 20 years also, to not be competitive in that era anymore. And that made color overall my response to this, of course. Of course, for work that is integrated with like moving stuff around, with just where you need to integrate then with what humans or maybe robots at some point do. This is completely different. And I don't know at what point it would be clear to say that this is now AGI or not. But I don't think it matters for the overall challenge that we face, like what we call that way. But I mean, I appreciate very much Matthias' point about the regulations being in place. Also, I just feel my main response to Matthias, what you had on your last slide, would be, have you thought about like how this will like totally flip around power relations, or who has power, who has something to contribute in society, and who has bargaining power? This is my main worry. That from there, it's just not clear what will await us.
Yeah, like I said, maybe I also haven't spent enough time kind of thinking about it. But again, I'm a big fan of kind of precise, or at least somewhat knowing like what we talk about when we say, what is AGI. So for instance, to give you an example, right, you might be replaced by a very intelligent language model maybe one day, right? So in the philosophy of physics. But is this something that needs to be regulated? I don't know, right? Or you had your thought experiment with Sybil. This exists already, just in human form, right? So politicians and monarchs have people that supervise them, and they have their agendas. And so again, what is the difference? It might even be an advantage if we have an AI system that then has to make public, for instance, what it has actually communicated with the leader, and what type of suggestions it has made to the leader. At the moment, this is happening typically behind closed doors by powerful entities, individuals who want to influence the decision-making of politicians, right? So with the examples, some of the examples also that you showed today, I have trouble kind of seeing what is so special about this if this is now an AI system doing this. Why does this need more regulation than what is already in place? Yeah, and if we don't have that regulation already in place, maybe we should already have it also for humans, right? So I don't really see that difference so much. So that is my kind of maybe also my shortcoming, yeah, in this discussion, is that I have not a clear idea of what you guys mean when you say AGI.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think what a difference might be between what you have in mind and what I tend to have in mind is that I tend to expect some compared to a child, right? So something very much unlike now someone who counsels a government, where probably the elected leaders of countries are also above average people. They don't have specialized knowledge, of course, as they're pretty bright. They can ask relevant questions back or so. But here, this would be the difference. Would be like that the epistemic differential is like a completely different kind, right?
I mean, yeah, let's maybe not go too much into it. When I look at some politicians, I don't want to name names, you know, that are going for election right now. I'm kind of worried about this power differential actually existing, and this also knowledge differential. But yeah, maybe we shouldn't go much further into the details here. But yeah, again, it would be really good, I think, just as a final comment on this, if the kind of the definition, the concept of, you know, from a philosophical point of view, the concept of an AGI system would be made sometimes a bit more precise. I think this would make the conversation a bit more precise as well.
Okay, so I think we need to be looking at the, you know, kind of translation issue here between philosophers and the engine room people like Matthias. Okay, so, but there's some more questions. David, could you go through them, please?
Yeah. So there's a question from Johannes. The idea of the loss of control as a gradual process is intriguing. Could this approach guide the implementation of technical safeguards? So we're taking our time to get to, I think this was in Matthias's slides. Could this help us manage the safeguards that we require to avoid the doomsday? That's one question. There's another question from MR. I'm not sure what MR's name is, but question is, the possibilities for improving life and work using AI and IoT are endless if we're able to thoughtfully and ethically harness their power. But what is the definition of ethics in today's world with every topic having a counterintuitive conspiracy theory or belief system? Will it not depend on whoever is in charge? And MR is Meha. So.
Right, I think we should take these two because they're quite different questions. Maybe going to the first one about the loss of control. So, should we have a kind of parallel process of technical safeguards when we move towards AI? Are we doing enough there, or do we need more, for example? So maybe Matthias, you could say something on this.
Yeah, actually, I think this was actually in Simon's presentation. This was Hendrik, right? So his kind of the idea that there is this loss of control that's happened gradually, kind of in an evolutionary sense, because, right, if a certain being is more intelligent, it will kind of survive and replicate in a more efficient way and use more and more resources. And at some point, we humans will kind of lose control over this. I think that's kind of the statement of you know, in a nutshell of this paper. So I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer here. But I think that again, like I stated also in my you know, outlook, I think that this that it's not that AGI is such a AI, the way that I understand it, is such a fundamentally different new technology than other technologies have been new in the past. And so I think that there will be, on the level of politics, society, ethics, regulation, there will be a gradual adaptation happening as we go, as it has happened before for other types of technologies. So I still have to be convinced that AI is in that sense such a new and different technology.
Could I ask you a question in that regard?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that social media was a new development? That we could have foreseen that it was entirely new? Because it led to, as far as we know, clinical depression in teenage girls. This was completely unforeseen, and it basically does only one thing. It allows you to show pictures of yourself and feeds you pictures of other people. And this is just one aspect of what an AGI might do. I think if you multiply the possibilities, then these kinds of counterintuitive effects, because what we anticipated was entirely different, right?
Right.
What we thought would happen was democratization and more communication, more love in the world, and what it led to was dictatorships and fake news and depression teenage girls. And this is just one single development, which is rather tiny compared to AGI, I think.
I would completely, so I agree, right? So you mentioned teenage girls getting depressed because of social media, and that truly exists. People also die in car accidents and in plane accidents, and technology always has downsides, right? And this is also in line with what I said, like in the history of humankind, new technologies are always an opportunity, but they also pose risks. And I would not say that social media was just bad. Right? So social media also has many, many good things going for it. Of course, we are focusing a lot on the bad ones now, like the fake news, and because also we are in a phase where we are still kind of adapting to it, right? We still don't know how do we react. Should we be paternalistic about it? Should we put more regulation in place? Countries actually respond quite differently to this, right? Depending also on the kind of cultural background. But I think in the end, also the internet and social media has been definitely a net positive. And again, there are people and there are downsides to all technologies, right? Again, I could mention the technology of a car. People die every day in car accidents, right? But it doesn't mean that we discuss now, should we actually, we discuss, of course, regulation of cars, and it has been improved quite a bit over the years, right? And cars are now much more safe than they were like 20 years ago. But again, I have to be convinced. So how is AI now this very fundamentally different technology to all the previous ones, right? Just by kind of speculating that it is somehow more powerful than just showing images on the web is not very convincing to me.
Okay, if I briefly,
Simon.
I think this is really absolutely a key issue, but I am also not completely sure that AI will be such a big change, but I think it's entirely possible, like to the extent that humans are different from other mammals, like, right? So that we are really looking at a scale like the transition from other animals to humans, and then we looking at a change of that type, right? So maybe not in 10 years, but in a couple of decades or centuries, right? So because everything, like if you can basically automate scientific progress, also like the changes are going to be so momentous, and so I have also no idea what they will be like, right? I totally endorse your message that it's impossible to predict this, but so this is really something that I'm not at all certain that it will happen. It's entirely possible that it will be like just another change at the scale of maybe social media or maybe the computer also. But I think I ascribe a non-zero significant credence to it being like a change of the order of going from other mammals to humans, and then I think really all bets are off, and what this is going to be like, yeah.
And so I think, right, just to repeat also and make clear that that's what I really believe is the discussion we have today, and the philosophers and ethicists and people thinking about these problems is, in my opinion, already part of this adaptation process, right? So it is really important that this is happening, right? I'm not saying you guys are silly, I'm just going to go back into my engine room, I don't care, right? But again, I think that with all of these adaptations that are happening, with all the people thinking really deeply about these issues, and then maybe coming up with regulations, that's already the social mechanism that's already in place to kind of take care of us eventually using and kind of also constraining this technology in meaningful ways, right?
Mm. Yeah, I was going to say that Simon's definitely not silly, but I might be a little bit. And one point that I think is important to point out is that you need philosophers for one specific reason, which was pointed out by Daniel Dennett. He said that in society there might be a lot of really bad philosophy, and philosophers' main job is to clear it out and to point it out where it might influence us. And I think Matthias has a point when he says that we should also look towards the benefits. And what you should emphasize, I think, is that AGI is a catastrophic risk, but unlike the other catastrophic risks, like for instance nuclear proliferation, climate change, pandemics, and the like, we have a considerable upside as well. We don't only have the downside. So it would potentially be an even greater catastrophe if we lose out on the upside while taking care of the downside. And this is what makes AGI different from other catastrophic risks, I think.
Okay, I think we should go to Meha's question now before we come towards the close. That is, if I understand it correctly, it's about ethics, and ethics being kind of, turning into something like in the hands of those who are in power and who is in charge. And so with a world with a lot of conspiracy theories and things like that, how are we going to handle this in this context? So if I understood that correctly, or maybe you could just ask the question directly if you switch on your microphone, that may be easier.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is more around, say, for example, we see on social media the war going on about, say, for example, I'll just take a live scenario, Trump being banned on Twitter, and then Elon Musk coming back in power, buying Twitter and then putting him back, giving him his platform. He doesn't want it, is a different thing, but there are definitely two sides to every story. And I understand every technology brings problems, but AI brings unprecedented amount of opportunities for criminals to misuse, which is same with, of course, the current cyber risks of connected infrastructures, of course. But what I'm trying to ask is that, I mean, what kind of ethics will an AI follow? I'm already hearing about right-wing AI and left-wing AI ideas being floated, and it's a huge mess, is what I think.
Okay, so this is about conflicting ethics that might also go into AI. So I don't know if you want to take that, any of you want to take that on, starting with Simon, maybe.
Yeah, I guess that ethics as a discipline, I'm not an ethicist, but as I understand it, it's mainly something for humans, and the roles of these systems will always be rather different from those of humans, right? Even if they can make humans redundant in certain tasks, so they will be quite different. And then I don't think we can like one say what their ethics will be or should be. I find it helpful if I try to be constructive and then say constructively see a positive role for them. I tend to find it useful to think of powerful AI systems maybe as a bit like institutions, like academia, or maybe like a constitution plus some constitutional enforcement, right? Also making sure that specific humans don't do a power grab or so. And then I don't know how I would frame this in terms of what ethical framework they should follow. Right? I hope that makes some sense.
So any last comments from the other two panelists, Nikhil and Matthias?
Well, I think perhaps now would be a good time to offer the distinction between ultimate and proximate goals, because I think we haven't distinguished this. I think what humans still always have to do is to specify what the ultimate goals are, because that's probably a domain where an AI wouldn't be able to choose. As soon as we specify what ultimate goal the AGI is supposed to be pursuing, then it can choose among instrumental goals as well. So I think the ethics always has to come from humans. Unless we find ourselves in a world where AGIs can talk to us as equals in terms of their morality, but that would be really creepy. That would be like raising an alien life form on Earth.
I mean, that's a good question, because yeah, so what would happen if aliens come here? Would they want to live with us or not, or just destroy us? So, Matthias, any last comments? And there's also a final comment, and I'd hand over to David for that and to close the meeting. So, Matthias, any comments?
Yeah, maybe also answering to the question of Meha, where so it, as far as I understood it, so kind of that AI has also potential dangers because people might use it, for instance, to spread propaganda, racism, these types of things. And I think, yeah, of course, that's a danger, right? Because it might amplify in the same way that social media and the internet amplifies, bad human traits, like hate, racism. But again, this is an ongoing adaptation process, right? And we are kind of, I think, still in the middle of it also for social media and the internet. And again, this will also happen with these type of AI technologies, is that we just have to respond to it, with regulations, with also technological solutions, of course, right? That's also part of the equation. So we need to then be able to maybe filter out fake news, make people aware of fake stories, for instance, if they've been generated. Maybe so there is two sides to it, right? So regulation, political, societal approaches to these problems, but then also technological approaches. And I think I'm also optimistic there. I think that we will be able to do this, eventually.
Okay, thanks, Matthias. I think I'll now hand over back to David to present the last comment that we have on the chat, and then close the meeting. So over to you, David.
Yeah, there's a nice comment from Delphine. Thank you, Delphine. I also believe that having such a competitor on the horizon, humans will have no other choice but give them the best of themselves. It's a huge opportunity. So that's a very positive way to end the webinar and to end the conversation, the discussion, which can be totally fascinating. It wasn't conclusive, but I would have been amazed and disappointed if it had been conclusive, because we've got a long way to go in addressing the issues that have been raised this afternoon. There are so many issues, and we're just scratching the surface, both philosophically and pragmatically, as to where we go to next. So I'd like to thank all the speakers, Simon, Nikhil, and Matthias, as well as Amadeo for moderating, and for all the participants who have borne with us for the last hour and a half. This session was recorded, and if nobody has any objections, we'll make this recording available on our website, together with, again, if an objections from the speakers, with the presentations themselves. So thank you, and I hope to see many of you again at future TDL webinars, and have a great evening.